Welcome to day one of training. I'm going to try and make it as fun and entertaining as possible. The topic is a little dry, but this is our agenda, what we're going to do today. I'm going to talk about the essentials of drop-in and the reasoning behind it, what our current online procedures are for drop-ins, and what we believe are going to be the next steps moving forward for drop-ins. And then I'll give you a very brief 20-minute resume workshop presentation. I'll go through it rather quickly because I want to leave some time for Q&A and then show all of you where the resources are now located, and I will also follow up by sending you a link. So any questions before we get started?
So what's essential for drop-in?
It's really simple, right? All of us, we just need to be present, right? You need to be available. You need to be interactive with students. Just be present, say hello, build rapport in a real quick fashion. Ask how they're doing. Most of us do that when a student comes in the Career Center anyhow, but that's all it is. How are you? What's the purpose behind your resume? Is this going to be utilized just for class, for your fraternity, sorority? Is this just so you can develop something for yourself? Are you looking for an internship, part-time work? Just ask those engaging questions, right? You're just providing them guidance. And so oftentimes individuals think, including past peer advisors, that we need to complete the entire resume, reconfigure the entire resume, and rewrite the entire resume. That's not our role with drop-in. It's encouraging them. It's being honest with them, being an integral part of the conversation that they bring up, and asking those questions and being positive with the students, always being honest, but also being positive. Oftentimes we'll have a student come in, I really need a job. I don't know what's going wrong. I've utilized my resume and, I'm never going to find anything. And it's just spinning that and being positive with them and say, well, let's have a look here on your resume and see where we might want to make some changes. So this, again, just engaging them. And most students, for the most part, are receptive to that. Drop-in sessions, they're about 15 minutes, first come, first serve, Monday through Friday. We haven't necessarily changed the timeframes during the academic year. Right now for the summer, it's still 1 to 4. But why do they come in? They come in because they are seeking that help or assistance on a resume or a cover letter, or they want to know about Handshake. And all of you know how to utilize Handshake. And so it may just be taking them through the steps to Handshake. Now, we've sort of moved all of the appointments from Handshake over to CPP Connect, but we can still show students, they can log in themselves and show them where the jobs are, where the events are, where the interviews are, info sessions, workshops. So still important, but these are the two primary reasons why the students come in for drop-ins. Every once in a while, they may have a question about interviewing, but that's just so few and far between, but primarily resumes or cover letters, sometimes both. So our current online procedures, what we have posted online, they email careercounseling@cpp.edu. And we have, we can copy and paste responses to those students and send it back to them. Would you prefer, especially if they attach the resume, would you prefer me to review it and add some comments, or would you like to have a live session? I can send you a Zoom link. And so typically the student responds and says, oh, just review my resume and send me feedback. So, I can take you through some of that. And again, this is what's listed on our homepage. So that's what we're currently doing. But we were attempting to integrate drop-in advising into the chat feature on the new website. But unfortunately, Gabe and I have been working on this together for a while, but we don't have any response to the chat feature. We have some specific questions about how we could utilize it for drop-in. So at this point, I'm not sure what's going to happen with the chat feature. So I think we're going to stick with the next online procedure, which will be CPP Connect for everyone. So hopefully all of you have had a moment to create your availability on your CPP Connect. Additionally, one thing I discovered on my own was that you can download and have this information then populate your Outlook 365 if you need that done. So I finally mastered that yesterday. So if you need some help, I can try and fumble through to help you. So ideally, the students are going to log into CPP Connect. They'll see the open availability, and then they'll schedule that appointment. So I think there's some items in the background that Pedro is working on. So one way or another, we'll be utilizing CPP Connect for drop-ins. Not sure about alumni. We may need to utilize that career counseling email as a secondary option. I'm not quite sure, but hopefully we'll get some additional information soon. So rocking a resume, right? When we think about resumes, some students, they want to rock the resume that way. Other students are looking at, hey, it's got to look pristine and perfect like a diamond. Other ones, they're all over the place with their resume. They don't know what they want to do. And other ones, they're very methodical about how they set up their resume. So there's all different sorts of styles of resumes, right? Here's some fun options here. My resume, I am good, hire me, right? We have other students, Gabe was talking, and I think Jerry mentioned, you know, this individual here, computer science, and they're using my little pony as a resume. Just fascinating to me. And then the one in the middle kind of has some photos, and yeah, none of these are going to work in today's world, with the exception of maybe My Little Pony if they're applying for something very, very, very specialized in graphic design. But even so, it looks very amateur. So I don't know that a student would want to utilize something like that. And those types of resumes, they get rejected all the time. And that's the hard part, because students, they do want to be creative. They want to stand out. They want to be unique. But, you know, when it comes down to it, they're rejected, right? So there's some jokes. I hope you all see the comedy in both of these examples here. But an ability to smell fear is a quality I've never seen listed on a resume before. And so students put really interesting information on their resume. So, but even so, the individuals asking or talking about that ability to smell fear, they're sort of asking or looking at this individual and not saying, oh, this is terrible, you shouldn't put it on the resume, but wow, this is really interesting that you have it on your resume. I've not ever seen that before. Clearly, students shouldn't put something like that on a resume, but they're not overly critical, even in the comedy here. And then this one is hilarious. What do you mean it's not a good resume? It's the most expensive one they had on eBay. So students log in, they're using templates, they're paying money. Oh my goodness. Yeah, just because you spend a lot of money on that resume, it doesn't mean that it's going to work out, and it could really get rejected by an employer. So my comedy, I love it. I think it's hilarious. There were other ones I wanted to keep it clean. But what is the purpose? Anyone want to tell me what the purpose of this resumes are? Why do we have them? Why do we use them?
Demonstrate your skills and ability to land a job.
Yeah. What else?
To
Make you
attract
stand
a
out.
recruiter.
To stand out. Caleb, what did you say? I didn't hear you.
To attract a recruiter.
Yeah. Get that interview, right? Most students think, oh, I need a resume to get the job. Resume will not get you a job. The resume will get you an interview. So yeah.
To catch their attention,
Right.
to make you stand out.
Exactly. The student needs to advertise themselves. Just a good summary of those skills and qualifications that advertises the student. And when the student realizes, oh, I will not get a job from this, I said, no, it's about you. It's about advertising what unique qualifications that you have in whatever fashion. And then the student realizes, oh, okay, it's not just a list of words. It's not just an objective. It's not just, whatever that might be for the student. It's a summary of your skills and qualifications, and you must advertise yourself. I tell students all the time, if you're not advertising the skills and qualifications and explaining good information on the resume will get passed up and will wind up in what we call the spinner, also known as the trash can. But there's some myths along with this, right? A lot of students think there's only one way to write a resume. You can write the resume however you like. There's some parameters that we discuss with students, but there isn't just one way to write it. Can't be one particular form. And there's different types of resumes for different types of positions. An internship resume is going to look very different than a full-time first opportunity for a student. A lot of students think volunteer experience, donating time shouldn't be on the resume, but it can be if we're adding it correctly and we're, again, explaining and advertising those summary of skills and that good information that can be very useful for that student to make them stand above the other candidates. Employers do not want templates for resumes. I can't tell you how many employers I speak with. I've sent emails out to employers, speak to them at career fairs. We did a search when the peers Samuel and Cassie and Ashley and Daniel and Valeria. I said, count how many times you see template resumes and which ones are the most utilized. And they came up with 4. And exactly the same. And I mentioned to students, if 20 students in marketing are all using the same template, then how are you standing out? When you explain it to a student that way, then they realize, oh, I need to make it my own. And that's why I say start with a blank document and fill it in with your own important information. And this page, I don't really spend any time on this page at all, because whether a student selects a chronological resume or a functional resume, that's entirely up to them how they're going to put their resume together. But more often than not, in all the years I've looked at resumes on campus with students, most are using chronological resumes. But if a student wants to use functional, that's up to them. If they want to use a combination resume, that's entirely up to them. I don't worry personally so much how they formulate the resume as much as it is it going to convey the information to the employer and provide them a really good summary of what they have to offer that organization. And a CV, I'll get more into that tomorrow. We have some really good resources. Basically, I would say for any of us in the Career Center, there's probably very few exceptions. We're all probably going to utilize a CV for higher ed in one form or another. There might be some exceptions on the campus, but I would say the majority of us in the Career Center probably have a CV or can put a CV together quite readily. So we'll go into more detail. Most students, unless they're in higher ed or that's what they're aiming towards, most are probably not going to have a CV. So even with peer advisor, I really don't spend too much time on CVs either, but I'll show you some good examples. Might even show you mine. I don't know, I have to look at it. But what are we looking for on a resume? Just font style, size, just looking at margins, making sure students know that some empty space is okay. There's a debate, there will always be a debate on the length of a resume. Generally, I tell students most often, a first year, second year, third year, probably will have one full page. Sometimes fourth years have 2 pages, but I say it's all or none. I wouldn't have 1.5 or 1.25 pages. I would look at reformatting, maybe utilizing different font sizes to make sure it's 1 page. And lastly, what's important, consistency needs to be there. So it's ease for the reader, because in all reality, employers are spending such a minimal amount of time reviewing a resume. Misspelled words stand out, different things like that. So some students spend hours and hours on resumes. I don't know, depends on the student. There's a lot of thinking that's involved. And I think asking the unasked questions can be very useful for students. But 15 to 30 seconds is not a lot of time. So if a student does have a 2-page resume, what I say and recommend to students is to put the most vital information on page 1 and closer to the top of the resume, so you can really engage the reader, and hopefully that employer will spend that extra time reviewing page 2. So that's just basically what I say to students often. But let's talk about, it's not my resume, but this individual's resume. What do you see are some issues on here? And there are a lot of them. In fact, a student found some that I didn't even realize were here. So just shout them out. What's wrong with this resume?
The bullet points, spacing.
No name.
No
Right.
name, the date, the spacing.
They labeled my resume.
California should be CA capitalized, maybe?
Yeah.
They bolded Cal Poly, but it looks kind of, it just looks weird the way they did it.
Yep.
In professional email, the font sizes are all different. Even the font styles are all different.
Yep. Yeah, the email, right? A lot of students put numbers and everything else, and you know,
There's no header. Like, there's really no, like, it's just, it looks like just, yeah, it doesn't look like a resume at all.
Yep.
There's no,
Boring.
no design. Yeah.
Yep.
Their interests are for a dating website, not a professional resume.
Yep.
Misspelling in the interest, which seem to be lame anyway. Hanging.
Yeah.
Hanging. How it runs.
It's really casual.
Yep.
It bugs me that there's 2 random periods
Yes.
after clean store period, answer phones period.
Yeah.
There's
more.
asterisks on the first one, but not on the second.
Very good.
Yeah.
What else?
They put a comma for listing that they graduated from high school instead of making it a whole other line for their education.
They put the high school when you no longer need a high school when you're already going to university.
Yeah, and it's 2021. They've been at Cal Poly a long time.
Did anybody say margins already? There's an issue with margins.
Yeah. No left margin and some right margin. What else?
I know they misspelled experience in there.
Yep.
It's not Sherry approved.
Not about me.
There's a lot of punctuation issues, you know, no capitals in places where there should be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Different types of fonts.
Yep, I think Seal mentioned that. So yeah.
Oh.
This is going in the trash, right?
Yep.
I think there are 3 misspelled words. 2 I know for sure, but I think there are 3. So yeah, and I know it's a funny example, but when I point each of these problems out to students, generally there's a lot of laughs, and they all shake their head and agree that this is going in the trash can. But there are some areas where we can develop that resume, and we can make some suggestions, and we can reformat it. Perhaps we can deliver on that goal, which is to use action verbs and to make it look very presentable. One thing I do also point out at the bottom of resumes, which, there's often a debate, but I've had multiple employers who have said that the phrase, misspelled, of course, references available upon request misspelled too. There's a third one. That's filler space. And they want to see that the student adds something on the resume that is going to showcase, again, their skills, what advertises them, what makes them stand out. And that statement at the bottom is, oh, I didn't have anything else to add on my resume, so I just threw that in there. So buyer beware. I'm always saying to students, be conscientious about what you have on your resume and think about adding something that could be more useful, because that is known as filler space to many different recruiters, especially ones that recruit at Cal Poly. So I tell students, write your resume how you like, but here's just some essentials, right? Obviously their name and their contact information. The street address is omitted more often now because of all the cyber issues that individuals have. And sometimes you're not really sure where you're sending your resume. So I tell students, be very conscientious of that. It's one thing if you go to the employer, or if they send you a secured site, you complete your application, you will add your physical address onto that app. But sometimes you need an extra line, need a little bit more space, open space on that resume. So perhaps it's just adding, Glendora, California. But that's entirely up to the student. But I say just be conscientious about that. And then statement, goal, summary, you'll see, I think on the next slide, why I have omitted objective here. Education, kind of important. Employers do recruit from Cal Poly Pomona because we're an established institution and we have great talent. Does it mean that it needs to be added in this order on a resume? I tell students all the time, no, but it can be very important and very, very helpful to the student when they're applying for opportunities. And experience in many different forms. Any activities, those are useful on a resume. Memberships, it's not a specific list. Skills, but that one's tricky. Honors, sometimes that goes under education. Oh, sorry, I went a little fast there. But skills, I often see students who just list skills, and employers want to see how you have those skills, not that you just possess skills. I can write that I have multiple skills, but I'm not showing the employer how I have those skills. I'm just saying that I have great customer service skills. That doesn't tell the employer anything. It doesn't show that you interact with a team. It doesn't show that you collaborate. It doesn't show anything. It just says customer service. And I could lie on my resume and say that I have that. So just listing it is not as helpful as describing it, especially in a volunteer or a work environment on a resume. But there's so many other sections that students can add. Their language skills, read, write, complete fluency, moderate fluency, beginner fluency. What else do you know? Not just, again, listing French, Spanish, German. That tells the employer nothing, especially if you're completely fluent. You want to accentuate that, advertise that, especially if it's important to an employer. What kind of internships? What different types of projects? And it doesn't necessarily mean academic projects. I mean, we have the innovation lab, maybe you're working on something together. Maybe you're involved in all different sorts of projects where you're working with others, maybe even in a different major, showcasing what you're doing. Entrepreneurial activities as well. There are a lot of students during COVID that created or started or worked with startup companies, created something on their own. That can be described out on that resume. Specialized training. One area that I emphasize when I had peer training was to make sure that they had safety training and that they were able to attend all different sorts of allied training as well. That's very, very helpful on a resume, and it helps for the next step, the next phase. Coursework can be used. Not all students use it, but sometimes all they've completed so far are notable courses. LinkedIn Learning, oh my gosh, that's the most useful tool for students to add information on a resume. But volunteer activities, all kinds of special training, club activities. Students, I would say for the most part, very much undersell themselves on their resume. There's so much to offer. And I forgot to mention military. We have lots of resources. I need to add that to the list, but through ONET, there's all sorts of links that can help with the military language and switching that up on a resume. So, as I mentioned a moment ago with objective, I have it in red and I have it very, very small compared to goal, summary, and I missed a space. Oh my goodness. Goal, summary, or statement. I've had a few employers, not too many, but I've had a few this year and a half that have made mention that they're sick and tired of seeing the word objective on a resume because it doesn't really say anything. And there have been some articles on NACE and some back and forth commentary from different individuals in career services. So, you know, I tell students, whatever they want to use at the top of their resume, again, make sure that it speaks to your goals, your abilities, summarize what you have to offer the employer. Maybe it's a statement that you want to make. And so these are just some examples. I also mentioned to students, try and keep the I, me, my's, and we's out where I can contribute, and I have this, and I have that. Just get right to the point, be as concise as possible. If you know a specific position that you're applying to, you can make it that specific. If you know which organization, you can make it that specific. These three don't show that, but objective is sort of, yeah, it's going away slowly. Again, whatever the student wants to utilize, as long as it's concise and provides that employer information in a very concise manner, that's what is most effective on resumes, in my opinion, and what I've seen work when students continuously email and say they're obtaining employment opportunities. So being concise can be very helpful. I want to stop here. Does anybody have any questions? So education, wherever that's going to be placed on a resume. Again, I don't tell students it has to be at the top or in the middle or at the bottom. That's entirely up to the student. But one thing I do highlight is the name. We have an official name, which is really long, but it's also a very regal name. And a lot of Cal Poly Pomona alum work in various industries, and hopefully when they see the official name on a resume, they'll maybe take a second to look very thoroughly at the resume to see what that individual has to offer. And hopefully the prestigious name brings back good memories for that alum. And it could get an interview for a student. So taking the easy way out, just putting Cal Poly Pomona, yeah, I would take an extra few moments and really suggest to the student to use the official name so it looks good. Whether or not they bold it is entirely up to them. And I also mentioned to students, and most of them do laugh, I say, don't put BS, put Bachelor of Science or Bachelor of Arts, depending on the major, and have the student look that up. That isn't something that we all need to memorize. I still get a few of them incorrect, but spell it out. Say it's Bachelor of Science and not BS. And then depending on the student, usually if they're closer to their end date or they just graduated, not to work themselves back. What year did I start? And then the employer starts thinking, wow, they were there 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. How long were they at Cal? Just get right to the point at the end. For most first years, it's going to be when they've started, which for this year, it'll be August 2021, right? Maybe it's this current, present, that's up to the student if they want to add that. But more often than not, it's been my experience with students, if they're closer to graduation, just put the end date and don't put anticipated, expected. I see that all the time. And there's only been one recruiter that said, I don't want to see that. If you're in your final semester, why do you anticipate that you're going to graduate? Are you flunking out of all of your courses? Just get right to the point. And it also opens up some space if you just put the month and the year. The day isn't necessary. And I see that quite a bit on resumes, like June 8, 2021. The specifics are not necessarily required. And GPA, usually 3.0 or higher on a resume. But I tell students, if your GPA is 2.9 and you worked really, really hard for that, and you're excited about that, and you want to put it on your resume, go for it. It's entirely up to you. But generally 3.0 or higher. Generally, the rule is if you've received a credential or a certificate or a degree diploma at a different university or a two-year college, you could certainly add that. A lot of students are putting associate for transfer. That's fine. Again, if a student wants to add something, that's entirely up to them. I don't say to omit it unless they took one class and that was it. But again, if the student wants to put it on there, it's up to them. No pressure on them. And as far as experience, what I think is really key is for students to articulate their transferable skills. If transferable skills or those types of skills are what are required for jobs that they're applying to. This may not be applicable to a first-year student, but just things you want to think about. And then quantify some sort of accomplishment if the student can on their resume. One accomplishment. It doesn't mean that they have to put an increase of 25% on every single bullet point statement or anything like that. But if they can showcase that they were awarded something for perfect attendance at work, that's a wonderful accomplishment to add to a resume. Or if they were promoted, a lot of students work at, oh goodness, at a fast food restaurant, in and out, and they're promoted, they're elevated, they get new roles. Showcase that in one way or another, if possible, on your resume so you stand out. And again, that paid or unpaid experience, if it's applicable, I encourage students to add that to their resumes. And then begin their bullet point statements as best they can with action verbs. And we have lots of cheat sheets and handouts that have multiple action verbs on them, which we can certainly forward out to students. And those resources are available to you. So here's some fun bullet point statements that we have actually seen on initial resumes. Fundraising, helped with the workshop, worked at front desk. Now, what are some issues with these? These are always so fun.
They're too vague.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't say anything about a student. How much did you fundraise?
Right.
Where did you fundraise it at?
Yep.
How many students did you see per day?
Yep.
Things like that. Dalma sees 1 million students per day, by the way. She's very busy.
Yes.
Alexis, don't get scared.
What else?
What was the workshop about?
Yeah. And how did they help? Did they set up the equipment? Did they present? Did they write out name tags? Did they scan people in? What do you mean you
do
help?
at the front desk?
It turned on the TV.
Yeah.
I don't even like the word helped. I think it doesn't describe the abilities very wonderfully.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We don't know. Did they hand out paperwork? Scan surveys, go around and hand everybody a balloon? We have no idea what this individual did. And yeah, to Caleb's point, fundraising, that is so broad. We have no idea what this individual did. And working at the front desk, you know, again, sometimes people receive 150 calls in a day. Sometimes they have one area at the front desk that they're supervising or they're overseeing or delegating tasks to other individuals. We have no idea what they're doing. And these are very, very common bullet points that we see. Maybe not so much fundraising, but we've seen them in the past. But, you know, how can we make it better? So it's just asking those questions. Everything that everyone mentioned. What were your duties at the front desk? Tell me what you did. Did you interact with people? Did you communicate? Were you effective? Well, I was promoted to lead front desk staff. Oh my gosh, that's something so useful. So here's some afters, right? So this individual, and again, this actually did happen. This was a resume I helped a student with. They planned and they organized a successful, and it's still generic, but a successful fundraising events for the fraternity. I took out the fraternity name and increased funds by 20%. So they're quantifying something. Again, this wasn't the final bullet point, but we have a little bit more here than just fundraising. Now we have a little more context. Hopefully we have the fraternity information if they were e-board or if they were a leader in the fraternity. The employer will know, oh, okay, this is exactly what they did. Well, what kind of events and what was the purpose for the funds? And it was philanthropy. I didn't add all of that in there, but it's quantifying and it's being a lot more specific. And we can be even more specific with the type of events. Again, the second one, you know, help with a workshop, effectively facilitated workshops on communication skills and assertiveness as part of a regional conference schedule. So again, it's still a little general, but we know a little bit more. It was a regional conference and they facilitated on these subjects. This was actually a communication student that had that help with the workshop. Oh my goodness. And then the final one, they supervised, right? They gave us a little bit more information, the operations of this front desk. It's a 200-room hotel, which that infers that it's busy there. And they provided direction to 3 support staff. We don't know exactly what the supervisory role was or what the direction for the staff are, but we have a bit more information and it sounds a little bit more specific other than just simply saying worked at front desk. So they supervised what sort of operation. So all 3 need a little bit more development, but it's better than not having any context. And again, it's just about asking the questions of the students, finding out what they actually did for their work. And then you find out, hey, you know, they were helping other staff or they were providing direction. They were really working hard to increase funding. They were at a regional conference. Hopefully that gets added into that resume as well. If they were an attendee or if they were a volunteer there, adding that information and developing information on a resume can be so useful for students, especially those that perhaps may not have worked at all. Yeah. So one other section that is not very well sold to students, although we do try our best, is thinking about those academic projects or any sort of project that students have worked on or something that they're currently working on for a class, or again, it could be entrepreneurial as well. Talk about it, incorporate that in a resume. Again, if they don't have any experience at all. So we do have a handout for academic projects. I primarily utilize the first example, so that's the one that I've included here, but there are two different ways that students can add those academic projects onto a resume. More often than not, two are perfect for a one-page resume, especially if they don't have any work experience, but generally students really only include one. I wouldn't do more than two if I were a student. But again, if the student wants to put three, I've had students, I want to put all three. Okay, and they're still looking for work. So, but they give simply just like a brief objective or the purpose for the project. Maybe there is a title for the activity. I always say add team if you're part of a team activity, or if there was a team of individuals that worked on the project, and make sure you let your teammates know that you're utilizing that on your resume. And then the tasks that this individual or the group worked on and what the outcome was. You're showing that star, right?
Yes,
Go ahead,
I didn't want to interrupt. Whatever I could ask. I just was thinking, if a student comes in and they don't have any work experience, they only have what they've learned in the classroom, is the section going to be labeled academic projects, or is the section labeled experience?
Usually a student will put like notable project if it's entrepreneurial, or entrepreneurial project if it's for a class. Generally it's going to say academic project. But again, students come up with really unique words to describe like a section. So if it sounds good and they're excited about it, add it the way that they think is going to be serve, the best overall, cohesion of that resume, and convey the information concisely to the employer, to the recruiter.
That's what I was thinking. Like, is it ethical to, if they wanted to label their section experience and use academic projects as like their primary experience in, that field or that area? I'm not sure.
It can be. It can just be experience because they've experienced it. They've gone through it. The student went through this entire activity. Perhaps it was a team activity, but they just better be able to explain it to the employer, because the employer will ask, tell me a little bit more about this analysis of financial statements. Tell me how you really reviewed those balances and how you calculated that depreciation. Tell me a little bit more. And hopefully they've had that really good experience and they're able to describe it out to the employer. But if they label it as work experience, then maybe that's not really telling the truth. But if they label it just as generally as experience, there should not be any issue with that, because it is technically experience.
Okay.
I think the more specific a student can be, the better. But some just put experience. Some put related experience, and then as a section, if it's an internship or it's projects, and then underneath additional experience or other experience, and that's where they put, if they worked at Carl's Jr. or on campus for ASI or whatever else they've done.
I was going to ask then, because with Zio's question, is putting down coursework related experience better, or academic projects? Because to me, like, academic projects almost sounds a little bit better, but I don't know.
It's up to the student. I've seen resumes where students will put coursework activities, and they'll take an accounting class, let's say, and then they describe what they learned in that class,
Okay.
whatever that might be, because I don't remember what the student put, but they do like, I don't want to call them paragraphs, but many phrases, like 3 or 4 phrases to describe what skills or what they acquired in the class. I don't know that that's the best way to put a resume together, but they articulated it beautifully. And I said, you know, perhaps because they don't have any experience in accounting, maybe that will be helpful to get that internship. And most of the students are doing it so they can obtain an internship. Once in a while, maybe it's an entry-level position. Again, it makes them unique, especially if they're using really concise language for that industry specifically. And in accounting, maybe a lot of those students don't work at all. They complete maybe the VITA program where they're sort of helping a little bit with taxes, just a little bit, but it's how you describe it that, you know, hopefully those accounting firms will see it and say, oh, okay, good. They did this with tax forms rather than, you know, process tax forms. They talked about the tax forms a little bit more. See, I can't see you, so let me see. Which then leads me to the next section, right? So we talked about putting together bullet point statements, maybe utilizing academic projects, adding experience in whatever way. But the one area that's really useful to employers, but also very useful for career center professionals to use are those core competencies, those essential skills. Those areas that are really important to employers. And I have asterisks next to all but one of these. But the next, and we'll come back to this page, but this next page is from NACE, and I'm sure everyone's looked at NACE. But these are responses from employers as far as what they want to see on a resume and the importance level on the resume. So if we look at the very top one, it says ability to work in a team. 81% as on that scale of 100%, 81%, almost the most important area they want to see on a resume in one fashion or another. So if we go back to the core competency, teamwork is there, leadership, communication, it's really, really important. So for a student who may not have work experience as part of a team, but they've worked on a team activity for class, so long as they show that they have the ability to work in a team, that is what the employer is looking for. Always being honest on a resume as well. The next one, right? If we look problem solving skills, that's really, really important. But for a lot of students, it's really hard to describe how they're able to solve problems. One way that that can come across, right, is communication, especially if they're in charge, if they're in a leadership position. Maybe it's critical thinking for their jobs. Maybe that's what's important. Or it could even be technology, especially if they're working in IT at the help desk and they're resolving issues and helping people. So their technology is up and running in record time or something like that. So they can still problem solve in many different majors, in many different areas where they're working, or even as part of the team. If there's a particular project or task that they have for class, and they're showcasing how they're able to solve those problems that arise, whether that be for, again, a classroom activity or in a work context. Communication is very, very important. And again, if we go back to the core competencies, it's right there, right? Communication includes equity and inclusion, can include professionalism, can include leadership, can include teamwork. So much of these areas are so important to employers. And these are really, they're very key because this is what employers want to see: leadership skills, your strong work ethic. I tell students all the time, if you've been promoted, that shows most employers that you have a strong work ethic, and that's important to employers. Detail-oriented, some majors, including finance, accounting, it can be obviously architecture. You need to be very detail-oriented. So how do you convey that on your resume? And at the very, very bottom, not that it's not important. I always say this to students all the time. The fluency in a foreign language, it's still important, but they're looking for people who can solve problems and who can communicate effectively and have those leadership abilities and those technical skills and computer skills and personal skills. That's so important to employers. The one on core competency that isn't necessarily listed, career and self-development, it's still a core competency that's very important. And when a student's able to obtain an internship, or when they're able to find a part-time role within their major or within that industry that they want to work in, that's going to come across on a resume if they're able to incorporate it into their resume for that first professional position or that entry-level position. So core competencies, integrating this into a resume and following those responses by employers, that's what's going to make a really good resume. And so often there are many aha moments when students see this, because they think to themselves, okay, in order of importance, what have I done and how can I get that on my resume in a concise fashion that shows what the employers are looking for when they read my resume. Students who don't show it have a harder time finding employment. Those that follow this, and again, I help many business students, I help all students, but I did help a philosophy student who did add all of this onto the resume and did get the internship. So, you know, again, they brought out that leadership on their resume. So following it, looking at it, I'll make sure that I have a copy of this in our folder on the shared drive so you can refer back to it. But all of this can be so useful on a resume and really show the employer how you're able to, you know, meet those expectations on job descriptions when you're applying. Thelma, you had a question.
Yeah, I was just, mine was more geared towards the career and self-development part. I know at the NACE conference, a lot of employers were saying that what they had noticed from a lot of students is that a lot of students looking for jobs did not have basic human skills or basic, you know, you were there, so you know. But
no, but I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it a good idea? Because a lot of them said that they were looking for students that had either certificates or badges and things like that. Is it a good idea to put that on the resume as well? And if so, where would that go on the resume?
Yeah, definitely. And let's see, let me go back. So special training, you know, they can list it. Notable achievements. I mean, there's so many sections that a student could add. And LinkedIn Learning, I say to students all the time, it's such a gift to have that because you can learn so many different things. You can brush up on Excel, you can learn and develop skills in Photoshop if that's something that the employer desires for someone to have, basic Photoshop skills. take a few of those courses on LinkedIn Learning that will help develop those skills for you and add it on that resume. Yes. What's going to make that student stand out? Absolutely. And yeah, definitely any badges, that's like the key term now that we're hearing all the time, and badges for everything. So maybe they want to put notable badges. You know, what's going to make those students stand out above the other students, so they can get noticed on that resume and they can then be brought in for an interview, and then shine in describing all of it. Describe your core competencies when you're asked those. Tell me about yourself. You know, well, I've been a leader, I've done this, I've done that, you know, go through your list in a really concise manner. So yeah, really good question. Absolutely. Yeah, they're looking for different. What makes the students stand out? And it's so hard to add information when a student has not really done too much. And I think LinkedIn Learning this past year has been very useful to students, especially if they've had some time. And they're starting to include some of that onto their resume. So yeah, definitely. I tell them not the 15-minute, you know, 1-minute commercial, but maybe something that's a little more developmental. So yeah. So one other, I want to leave enough time here. Okay. So one other notable area are the ATS scanned resumes. And employers are utilizing this software. We see it's probably going to take away resume reviews for all of us if we purchase this, but companies are using these softwares to scan and sort these resumes. And students, that's one reason why an all text resume or a resume without boxes and columns, all of that, you know, so often we see interesting fonts and things like that. It's probably not going to get through the ATS system. So I always encourage students, maybe you want to have 2 resumes, one where you may submit in person or you submit online directly to an individual with a PDF, always PDF, but to have a very plain text only format, if it's going to be a really large company, because you just want to make sure that your information gets through that system. And those key competencies and qualifications on the job postings, those are the markers oftentimes through a scanware system. And if they're utilizing an example like provide customer service, and on your resume you have daily customer service, maybe you want to think about using provide customer service if that's exactly the work that you do, because those are key competencies or key qualifications that might be on that job posting, and that's input on the scanware system, and your goal is to get your resume through so you can get a potential interview or have a real person look at your resume. So Alexis, you had a question?
Is this those systems that why I've heard peers recommend to students that they shouldn't use headers that have like the line to cut off, or is that something else?
Probably is, from what the peers have said. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm not anti-header, but I say to students that the colors on the header might be different than the rest of the resume, and maybe it won't get picked up through a scanware system. So if you do it just on a blank document and you create your own and the colors are consistent, everything's the same throughout, very plain, but it's the words that are most important. And not to use a header. So I discourage header usage, but that's just me. But again, if a student, hey, if they want to use it, I'm not going to tell them no. But when they come back and they're having problems, I'll look at it and say, okay, maybe let's try it without the header, send a few more resumes, see how it goes. And maybe you'll get some calls back. So that definitely can be one thing to think about.
I just want to make a comment on this. So this actually happened to me back when I was in another career center where ATS would actually read the header, and because it had, let's just say, Alexis Lopez and a big old line underneath her name across the page. That line, a lot of the ATS systems would think that that was the end of the page, and that was how they read. And so this is why I don't use lines at all. And Sherry's right. Don't use boxes. Don't use any crazy things like that, because these type of scanners will think that's the end of the page. So
Yeah.
that happens a lot.
Yeah. And the boxes, you know, I've seen so many different resumes and they're beautiful and they have pretty boxes here and there. And I read it left to right for the student, and it says seeking full-time opportunity with Oracle, Python. And then the next line. So I'll read a couple of them as if I was scanning it. And I said, do you see why or do you understand why there's an issue with utilizing boxes in different sections? Because if the scanning is going to read it, it's going to read it incorrectly. It's not going to read each box. And then the student, oh, I get it. So it's just educating the student. In person, if you're going to hand that type of box columns and all of that, that's different. But online, just be really mindful of that. And I always say, I know text-only format looks boring, but your goal is to get the interview, and then you can shine during the interview, and then hand them the different type of resume if that's something you'd like to do. So scannable resumes, just to sort of continue, I've created the font styles, Arial, Times New Roman, Helvetica, and Courier font, just to show examples. Most often for scannables, you want to stick to one of the more generic type fonts and not use something really, really strange. And then left justify, I kind of put this awkwardly, but just to prove the point, to left justify items, not really utilize those double tabs, underlining, and the italics, and that, again, it may or may not go through that ScanMore system, and the scanner's probably not going to read it, in addition to all the lines and everything else. So boring is best, particularly if it's a larger organization that probably has invested in an ATS system. The goal, I say to students all the time, is to get the resume to a person, or get the resume to a group of people who see what you have to offer and then bring you in for the interview. That's the goal. The look of it, it's more important to have the right information on there for the ScanMore system than it is to worry about how pretty it looks.
Sherry, do you know if companies disclose whether they're utilizing a software like this? Normally not, so it should be assumed that all resumes need to be formatted to be scannable.
That's a great question. I don't know. I assume that larger organizations are going to have them. And I just say to students, you know, I'll ask that question, how many resumes have you sent out? And if they say, oh, 40, 50, okay, let's take a look at the resume and see what's going on. What sort of organizations are you applying to? And if they say the larger organization names, then I really promote creating, you know, a scannable resume. Let's try it this way, and let's take a look and see what sort of information you have on your resume. So it's asking the question, but I don't know. I don't know that a lot of organizations, I think the larger organizations probably have a system. The smaller ones probably don't. I don't know. Caleb, what are your thoughts on that?
I Googled it really quick. And it says 98% of Fortune 500 companies use it. And so like Walmart, Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. The larger one. Yeah.
I agree with Sherry. We don't actually know who does and who doesn't. Some of them will actually say that on their company site. But I mean, I just rather be prepared for the worst and just not do it. I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I were to go to a career fair and I want to get fancy, sure, because that's a career fair. I'm actually seeing the recruiter and I can show them my resume and they can see it and be like, oh, okay, cool. But I bet you anything that recruiters are going to tell me 5 seconds later, can you please submit this resume also online? And I'll be like,
Yeah,
oh,
because that's my thing. Like I'm a visual person, and a lot of text overwhelms me. So I think like that, like the lines I have, when you guys said the thing about the lines, I have lines on my resume, like to break up the different sections. I had no idea that the scannable, it read the end of the page, but like to the person who's looking at it, I feel like it really helps to distinguish sections. But maybe you
oh,
can
you gotta
give
go
some
to
tips on like how to break up those sections so that it doesn't look too overwhelming for a recruiter.
Yeah, I'm not against lines, but personally, I think minimal lines help the reader. When I see lots of lines, it can be distracting, but that's just me. You know, maybe to each of us will have a different take on that. There's nothing wrong with using them, but I think maybe one change that one could make, a person could make on a resume, is to make each of the headers all bold, or maybe they want to use a different font size than the body of the resume, so the employer will know that. Sometimes students put those headers in the center rather than on the left. Maybe that would change it a little bit. Are they paragraphs? Are they just bullet point statements? How does the overall aesthetic of the resume look, and what's going to make each section stand out? And I will say I've helped quite a number of engineering students this past year, and you know, the majority of them have multiple lines, and that's not to say they've been to the Career Center before. They haven't. That's why they came back to the Career Center. So that's not saying anything bad against engineering students, but the few that I have helped this past year, they've had multiple lines on the resume, and cleaning it up and making it more so a scannable type resume has been more effective than utilizing all of those lines on the resume. But I see how they, you know, why they wanted to use those, but we have to look at it in terms of what will the machine pick up, not is it going to be easier or harder for the person to read it, because it's going to be all online and it's going to be scanned, particularly for engineering in those larger firms. So but then again, you know, for higher ed, a CV is going to look very different than a resume too. And you know, if you have a lot of information in each one of those sections, then maybe the lines are not distracting.
So cater to the robot.
I like that. We cater to the robot here. That's awesome. All right. So what's no for most resumes, right? Too crowded, like this example. Oh my goodness gracious. There's too much on this resume. Templates, yeah, let's get away from those. Personal pronouns, and I had to be very, very clear within the context of describing your jobs. Personal photos, I've seen photos on resumes, and they might be very professional looking photos, and it just, it's not a good idea. You want to focus on the skills and abilities that you have. And if you use a photo again, and it's a ScanMore system, it's not going to go through. This resume here, it does lack focus because they have skills, abilities, achievements, and core competencies all sectioned off together. So it's all over the place. And there's such a good example of what not to do. I just love it. And then unrecognizable graphics. I had inappropriate there, but they're unrecognizable to potentially the ScanMore system. So the specialized boxes in different colors can be those that are not recognized if it's going through ScanMore. So what I often say to students, whatever's on Word, or if you're going to use a Google Doc, just be mindful of what may or may not get through. If it's something really, really unique that you find on some website, or you use Photoshop to create, your specialized bullet points, it's probably not going to be recognizable and it may not go through potentially. So just to be really, really conscientious about that. But going back to crowded, we don't often have this issue with resumes. Usually there's a lot of empty space, but we don't want to crowd the resume so much that the employer just stops reading because there's too much information. And as I say to students, you know, if I'm presenting to you, I do not give you my shoe size because that's just too much information. And probably no one on the staff knows my shoe size because it's too much information. So don't overshare on a resume either. That does get into some real specific questions that are asked. Now, I will say for a lot of engineering students and a lot of engineering firms, they do require, for example, US citizenship. So sometimes students will add that to their resume. Primarily, it's going to be within that potentially governmental realm, computer science, governmental realm type positions, or engineering, sometimes for computer info systems. But more often than not, they don't need to disclose that information on their resume. I've had international students also add very specific information about their status. That is not something that needs to be on the resume for students. If it's required that they list US citizen for a governmental agency, you know, again, it's entirely up to the student whether they want to disclose that on their resume or not. The further they get along in an interview process or application process, you know, there are other questions and other items that would probably be required. So again, it's entirely up to the student, but I caution them not to overshare. Be really conscientious about that.
Sherry,
And,
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Jerry.
Oh, I was just going to add something I found unique from attending NACE was that the subject they were talking about on one of the workshops or meetings was redacting. You know what that is? We're kind of taking out things and censoring things from resumes. I guess the employers were talking about like addresses and schools and even degrees not to be seen, or kind of blocking them out when they're doing their searches and stuff. I guess it's to provide equal opportunity and fairness or so. But the fact that they had mentioned addresses, schools, and degrees, I was like, wow, what are you talking about?
The address I could definitely see. And a lot of students are just putting their name, email, and phone. Mm-hmm. And that's enough. They just want to be able to know who you are and how to contact you. But the school, I've not heard that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I said schools too. I jotted it down at the time. I was just looking at my paper. I'm like, I wrote down the word redacting, and I'm like, when they mentioned that, I'm like jotting it down real fast. And so I got to look up what this is a little bit more about or so.
Well, if they're posting at your university, they've chosen to post at your university as an employer, right?
Yeah.
So then whether or not the student puts Cal Poly, if they are using Handshake, they would know that they elected to post. Think about.
Yeah, it's something to look at in more further so, but.
How would they verify if the student has a degree, if the degree is required for the position? Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's good. And this was at the conference. So they're talking about, okay. And perhaps it's someone who's physically taking the resumes. Maybe they're redacting like on their own.
Yeah, it's like I said, they were talking about cutting out like the schools and the addresses and the degrees and stuff. And somebody had responded with, I was looking at their chat too at the time, saying, yes, we're starting to do that more and more or something. So
interesting. We'll have to look at that. Maybe that's a further conversation. Yeah. Considering we just received a how many $1 million grant? We're a good school, right? Yeah. We're a really good school. So something to think about. Interesting. Yeah, stuff changes all the time.
Mhm.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Help.
So some of the areas, just again, I keep using the word consistent, right? Be consistent on your resume. Use the same font type throughout a resume. Changing it up, yeah, it's not consistent that way, generally speaking. Be as specific as you can, quantify something if you can. Always be factual, be positive. The one example I give so often to students is, don't put complaints, maybe put issues or use a different term. So it's not like I had to manage all these customer complaints, because the individual who's reading it may think, oh my goodness, in a negative way or in a positive way, so you want to be as positive as you can, show those results as best as you can, be relevant, especially with technology. And I would even say for myself, on my resume, I need to add Zoom, I need to add a CPP Connect, I need to add those relevant skills. Those that are most useful and most current now, Google Docs, all of that, rather than putting Microsoft Word, Outlook, and what else do you know? What makes you stand out? Again, presentation matters. Selling yourself in a good light on that resume, always being factual, emphasizing again a result, and more than anything, proofread and edit, and come to the Career Center and seek advice. These students are in front of us and very engaging. Like I said, I think Jerry remembers, maybe there's been one student who's not been receptive to that help. We do see that. Whoops, sorry about that, few and far between. But more often than not, the students want that help, and you can ask them, what section do you want to focus on that's most important to you today? We'll try and look throughout the whole resume, but tell me what area is most important for you that you have, questions about, and let's see where we can go from there. Sometimes reviewing the entire resume first is helpful. For me, that's most helpful, so I get a better sense of the student. But for other people, it's asking, what section do you want to work on? For other people, it's just having a conversation and not spending too much time on the resume. Every student is different. Every student is unique. Every student has something great to offer those employers. And I often tell students, they want to hire you. So look at this as your ticket to get in front of them, so you can tell them all the fabulous things that you've done or are doing on the campus or in your positions. And oftentimes students come in and they think, oh my gosh, it's doom and gloom resume time. It's not. We're here to help. And I think comforting them, helping them. Sometimes students lose jobs. Sometimes students have issues with how shall I call it, with situations, and they're no longer employed. Work through it. If it's something out of your scope, out of your knowledge, you're not sure, always feel free to send them along to one of the career specialists. You all know me, I'm always happy to help a student the best as I can. If I don't have the answers, I'll let them know, but I'll also find that information out for them. So don't ever feel like, uh-oh, I don't know what to do with this resume. If you don't, just be transparent. I'm not quite sure how to help. I'm not sure what I can provide to you here, but I do know someone who's worked on many resumes. Let's see if they're available to help. So always know that we're around. I'm happy to help if a student has specific questions. And sometimes resumes look perfect and I have nothing to say to why are you here? Your resume looks great. And you will run into those students as well. So let me see where we're at on time. Okay, any questions about resumes? That's just kind of step one, real high level information. Tomorrow we'll get into more specific resumes and talk about different sections and so forth. And then Wednesday, we'll just do kind of round robin on resumes. But any last questions on resumes? Two binders that have all different sorts of resumes, and pretty much every major on the campus. So they're all Cal Poly former student resumes. And so those can be really, really helpful. Well, maybe I can scan them all and then put them in the drive, and then we'll all have access to them. It'll take a while, but they're identical books. So maybe that's something I can add to our repertoire online. But good question. So cover letters, it's so straightforward. There's only 3 slides to this. First of all, I say to students, again, you can create a generic type cover letter, but you are going to add or make changes to that generic cover letter as positions are available and as you find those organizations that you're excited to apply to.